Welcome to Genomics in Java, a place for science stories and conversations that I hope you'll enjoy as much as what's in your favorite cup. My name is Jennifer Carden, and with me today I have Dr. Neil Lamb, the Vice President of Educational Outreach. And Dr. Lamb is going to talk with us today about the annual Biotechnology Guidebook. So Dr. Lamb, what is the Biotechnology Guidebook?
It's a great question. Jennifer, the guidebook is something that the education outreach team at HudsonAlpha puts together every fall that covers new findings in the field of genomics and biotech over the last year. These are things that are way too new to show up in a classroom textbook, and we build this intentionally to help students, educators, and the public stay on top of some really cool new findings that are happening in cancer, in human health and disease, agriculture, infectious disease, just a way to stay updated on the current science.
There's so much happening in this current science field. With everything that's going on, how do you narrow down and choose which stories to put in the guidebook?
There are thousands of science papers published every year. And so it's a bit of a challenge. So the team and I keep our eyes open throughout the year as new discoveries are announced. And we think, would this be a good candidate for the guidebook? And then we narrow it down to a few hundred. And then we narrow it down to about 75 or 80 that the rest of the team actually digs through, and we collectively make a decision on what are the final 50 that are going to show up, and do we have appropriate representation across all of these different areas of science.
How, with all of the different areas of science, what are some of the things that you're the most excited about in this year's guidebook?
Well, every year's guidebook is always my favorite because the stories are just so amazing. It's such an incredible time to follow the science and the basic science discoveries and how they show up in the real world. So it's hard to pick a set of favorites. There are a lot in here about ways to treat human disease and ways to diagnose disease and infectious disease and agriculture, more sustainable crops. But I've brought some props for some stories that I think your viewers might find especially intriguing. And you can see we've got a whole set of interesting things that run the gamut from an understanding of the genetic code for a pest that deals with grapevines year after year and how that may help us create hardier vines. A really interesting story in this year's guidebook is about dairy identical cheese, which is cheese that uses the exact same proteins that you would find in cow's milk, but it actually comes from microbes, not from a cow.
So from microbes,
Yes,
not from a cow.
But it is identical to what you would see if you looked at the proteins that you would find in cheese.
Stay tuned. We are definitely going to dig into that on future episodes of Genomics in Java.
Yes. And then there's a whole set of what might you find in your medicine cabinet that genetics and science is helping to shape. So, the wives' tale about stress turns your hair gray. And it actually turns out that's actually grounded in some science. And so we'll talk about that. And in stressful times, I think that's an interesting story for us to cover. And then scientists have identified the biological pathway for body odor, which is one of those subjects we don't generally talk about in polite company, but it has a potential to shape the way we rethink about products that cover body odor, but also protect the microbiome that's naturally found under our arms.
We have a microbiome under our arms. That is definitely details worth digging into.
Yes.
And speaking of digging into, I typically, when I read something, I might get a little snippet or a little taste of it, but then I like to be able to know where did that information come from and dive in a little bit deeper so that I can read it for myself. Can we do that with a guidebook? How could our viewers find more information about each of the articles in the guidebook?
You certainly can. We've built the guidebook, we've built the stories in a way that provides you a snippet of information, maybe a paragraph, maybe a half a page. But then at the end of each article is a link to the original science journal where that article is published so that you can dig into that. Many of those are freely available. Or maybe it's a website or it's a press release so that you can dive as deep as you'd like to in these stories.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb, so much for joining us today and for what sounds like a labor of love. We hope that you guys will continue the conversation and enjoy your cup. Until next time.